The neighbor's daughter went missing. The next time we met, it was at the scene of a murder. The girl looked like a beggar, her bones were broken in many places, her body was dumped in a tourist area. Chapter 1. That afternoon, while I was in the office, rushing to finish my report, I received an urgent call. The area where a strange case had occurred, I was asked to bring the forensics to the scene immediately. The scene was a crowded tourist area, right at rush hour. Notably, among the colorful carp, a body floated on the water surface. The victim was a young girl, lying on her back on the water, her face pale and swollen from being in the water for too long, looking extremely scary. When forensics old man Tran arrived, his colleagues were trembling as they brought the body to shore. The body was placed neatly on a stretcher, her hair still stuck to her forehead, her limbs were strangely twisted, almost deformed. Old Chen squatted down next to the body, using his fingers to run over the elbow joints, the wrists were wet. There are no signs of broken limbs, but the joints that can bend are completely dislocated. Perhaps the murderer has a special perverted hobby. He shook his head and clicked his tongue, continuing to check other traces on the girl's body. After a preliminary examination, he concluded, there are no signs of strangulation on the neck, but there are bubbles in the mouth, hemorrhages in the conjunctiva, and purple fingertips and lips. These are signs of drowning. The girl suffocated while still conscious, the joints were broken afterwards, and finally, the body was dumped. Drowning is a very painful way to die. Suffocation causes the victim to endure terrible pain. This process takes place while the mind is still conscious. When concluding the cause of death, Old Chen sighed, his eyes seemed to freeze as he looked at the girl. At that moment, he suddenly froze in place. The corpse in front of me looked very similar to the neighbor's daughter who had gone missing. At that time, she was still an innocent young girl. But now, there was only a cold corpse left. Chapter 2. The victim's name was True, only one name remained on the papers, True Hu Fai. I remember very clearly, that girl's name was Hu Fai. When I first received the assignment at the criminal investigation team, Hu Fai lived right next to me. As the only female police officer in the team, I experienced many initial difficulties. The area I was in charge of was like the end of the world. The first time I met my boss, he immediately threw me a stack of documents. A case of a missing daughter last week, follow me to the scene. The boss only said one sentence, then turned back to the interrogation room. The first case I took on, the victim was Hu Fai. My impression of her was someone who always hugged a doll tightly. Her face was not too outstanding, but her features were soft. Xiao Fei has an introverted personality. When talking she is usually soft-spoken, sometimes a bit shy. Such a girl should not have encountered any unexpected events. But after going out with her friends, she never returned. The last image of Xiao Fei is on the security camera. The camera recorded her walking into a small alley. In the alley, there was a silhouette of an old man with a hunchback, leaning against the wall, slightly bowing his head towards Xiao Fei. That man was wearing an old hat that covered half of his face, making it impossible to recognize. The entire surrounding area, from neighbors, acquaintances, to Xiao Fei's parents, no one knew who he was. It seemed that he took advantage of Xiao Fei's kindness, pretended to ask for help, then lured her into that narrow alley. There were no security cameras in the alley. From that moment on, Xiao Fei completely disappeared. This case was like a scar in my heart, to the point that I had to move back in with her parents. Looking at the bewildered eyes of the two of them every time I met them, I blamed myself. If there had been an extra camera in that area, if the case had been assigned to me earlier, if there had been a more experienced police officer in charge, would Xiao Fei's fate have been different? But in reality, there is no if. When Xiao Fei's mother, Lu Yun, heard the news, the first thing she said was the same as when she reported it to the police. Xiao Fei. Did something happen to her? At that time, I still tried to comfort her. If there is no news, it is still good news. Xiao Fei is definitely still alive. From then on, Lu Yun quit her job, left her home, just to find her daughter. Now, when she saw the body, Lu had aged a lot, her hair was gray on both sides. But the truth before her eyes crushed her last ray of hope. At that moment, I felt that I was even more cruel than the murderer. The DNA test results showed that the body was indeed Xiao Fei. Before she died, she lived a vagrant life and became a beggar. Xiao Fei. How did you become a beggar? Looking at her daughter's corpse, Mrs. Lu kept repeating that question. She once told me that she had never been desperate. I believe that Xiao Fei is still alive. Every week I cook dumplings waiting for her to come back. But now, when faced with the painful truth, Mrs. Lu completely collapsed. She collapsed. I tried to help her up, but she suddenly grabbed my hand and shouted, "Xiao Fei. Policewoman. You've met my daughter before." Lu Yun kept pointing out the differences between the corpse and her daughter, as if trying to deny everything. My Xiao Fei has such a personality, how could she walk while bowing her head and begging and pleading with others? Impossible. Policewoman, you must be mistaken, right? As she spoke, Mrs. Lu couldn't help but shed tears. After so many years of searching, the final result was like this. That poor mother actually understood everything, but she didn't dare to admit it, and didn't want to admit it either. Mrs. Lu knelt beside Xiao Fei's body, unable to speak for a long time, only able to mumble in a hollow voice, "Xiao Fei was a good child." How did she become like this? Why was she murdered? That question was not only hers, but also all of us. Xiao Fei was a good girl, but the body on the autopsy table was now like a stranger to us. The girl claimed to be named Zhao, no one knew her past. All we knew was that about 6 years ago, she suddenly appeared in this area with a child. The two were not related by blood, but claimed to be siblings. They wandered around together, taking advantage of the pity of tourists to beg for food. The child who accompanied her was nicknamed Alai. The boy's true identity was also very vague. According to the people around, Alai was not normal. The boy had been seriously injured, leaving serious sequelae. Currently, Alai only has very limited communication skills, acts strangely, and is sometimes aggressive. A roadside shop owner said that he had seen Alai strangling a kitten to death, letting the cat struggle until it stopped breathing. As for True, her body had many strange dislocations. The perpetrator seemed to be a person with an extremely unstable mentality, and the purpose of killing was likely related to hatred or revenge. However, True lived alone, had no close relationships other than Alai. Alai had no relatives to report the case, and to this day has never appeared directly before the authorities. Although Alai's condition was not suitable for such a sophisticated murder, we had no other choice and decided to arrest him. When we raided Alai's residence, the boy's first reaction was to scream in panic. Alai cowered in the corner, looking at us tremblingly. To be so afraid of the police, he must have a guilty conscience, one investigator whispered. Looking closely at Alai, I discovered that his arm was deformed, almost stuck to his body, looking like a curved hook. With this physical condition, Alai could not have caused serious injuries such as dislocations on the body of True, who was 1m62 tall and weighed nearly 50 kilograms. Looking at the child cowering in front of us, we felt like we were punching the air. The only suspect was the one with the lowest probability of committing the crime. Chapter 3. In another development, the results of the forensic examination by Mr. Tran showed that True's time of death was between 2 and 3 a.m. She drowned, and this was confirmed by the small injuries on her body. The perpetrator did not detain Zhao for a long time, but only tortured her before pushing her into the lake. The traces showed that the torture lasted more than an hour. Based on the time, the crime scene was definitely near the lake area and should have good soundproofing, most likely a basement or similar location. Although Zhao suffered brutal torture, there were no signs of sexual assault on her body, which indicates that the case was motivated by hatred and revenge. Analyzing the wounds on her body, the forensic doctor determined that there were a total of 31 dislocations. Due to the different directions and ways of impacting the bones, the wounds were divided into two types. One type was caused by a left-handed person, very sophisticated, like someone with specialized techniques. The other type was caused by a violent person, without techniques, simply using force to break. This shows that the perpetrator was not one but two people. The investigation team split into two groups. One group focused on searching for suspicious locations near the lake, the other group checked for people who had conflicts with True, especially left-handed people. The investigation process was very difficult. It was expected to take 2 to 3 days to preliminarily screen all the subjects. As for me, instead of participating in the screening, I focused on a missed detail, a lie. Although the possibility of a lie directly participating in the case was very low, the image of the boy's deformed arm reminded me of a hot topic in 2011, the campaign to rescue kidnapped children. Acts such as cutting off hands and feet had been mentioned online, although never officially acknowledged. No one dared to deny that these extreme phenomena still existed quietly. With suspicion, I asked forensic doctor Mr. Tran to collect Ali's DNA sample to enter into the missing children search database. The result was surprising. Ali's DNA matched a missing person reported 48 kilometers away. The missing child was named Truong Tan, who disappeared when he had just entered middle school. The records did not record any physical or mental defects, and even the photos showed that the boy was very healthy and had a bright smile. The story sent chills down the spine. My colleague rushed to the address to report the case, but when we arrived, we were informed that the mother, Ho Tui Nguyen, had also gone missing. The local police explained that after her son was kidnapped, Ms. Ho fell into a state of mental disorder, eventually going crazy and disappearing. When investigating her relatives, they confirmed that Ali's father, Truong Nguyen, was a notorious gambler. Because of high-interest debts, he sold both his wife and son to human traffickers to pay off his debts. From then on, Truong Nguyen became a suspect. We began to suspect, did Zhang Jun accidentally discover that his son had fallen into Zhao's hands and committed the crime out of revenge? However, the interrogation of Zhang Jun was not easy. As a professional swindler, he was used to being summoned and constantly lying to the police. To deal with such a person, the only way was to get straight to the point. We took out a set of photos from the file and placed them in front of Zhang Jun. At first, he was still sitting with his legs crossed, appearing calm as if nothing was wrong. But as the number of photos increased, from close-ups of the wound to Ali's dazed face, Zhang Jun's arrogance suddenly disappeared. He raised his head, his eyes filled with panic. What? What is this? Didn't she agree to buy the child? How did he end up like this? The accusations from Mrs. Ho's relatives were not unfounded. Zhang Jun admitted to selling his son, Zhang Qing, to a woman to pay off his gambling debts. He did not know the buyer, only through a creditor's broker. The child was beyond saving at that time, but if I had not sold him, I would have been finished. Regarding the decision to sell his son, Zhang Jun did not show any regret. He was only angry that the buyer did not keep his promise, making things worse. Amidst the obscene curses, he pointed at Zhao's photo and said, "Where is that bitch now? I have to deal with her." When he learned that Zhao was dead, Zhang Jun seemed to have lost his target of hatred. We were forced to continue investigating the child trafficking ring. At the same time, a question rang in my head that could not be stopped. What did Xiao Fei go through? What caused a little girl to be kidnapped, gradually become a child trafficker, and become someone like Zhao? By chance, through investigation, we found the person who introduced Zhao to Zhang Jun, a creditor. This person was serving a sentence in prison for inciting to cause injury. Interrogating such prisoners is much easier, because they are in a situation where they have nothing to lose. This creditor is a cunning person, but when mentioning Zhao, his eyes are full of calculation. That girl deserves it, but actually she is not as bad as you think. He told about the first time he met Zhao, when he had just received a large sum of money. That day, he came across a skinny girl with bleeding knees from kneeling to beg for money in a small district. Zhao was with a short guy at that time, both of them claimed to be siblings. However, the creditor realized that the two of them did not resemble each other at all. Zhao seemed very scared, not daring to say a word. This description reminded us of the image from the security camera, a person wearing an old beret, looking like an old man. When I asked, he immediately understood and nodded in confirmation. Back then, I thought that such a small, weak girl could not endure a few days in that old man's hands. Who would have thought that not only did she survive, but she also became a completely different person? According to the story, a few months later, he met True again at a market. But this time, True was no longer forced to beg. She brought along a girl about 6 years old, coldly ordering the child to kneel and beg for money. So True went from being a victim to a child abuser? Even forcing others to beg? The man was silent for a moment, then replied, "Everyone changes, she did it just to survive." Because she was a convicted criminal, the creditor did not reveal much about his later relationship with True. He only said that True was a bottomless black hole, always lacking everything. If she has nothing to compensate, she will make others pay with their lives. We asked more about the child trafficking ring, but he insisted that True had never mentioned any organization. She only handles children who are easy to sell. Just like how she turned a lie into a disabled person, then sent him to the streets to beg. The sentence made my heart sink. When I first saw Lai's deformed arm, I suspected that he might be a victim of organ harvesting. But I didn't expect the madness to come from True herself. At this point, True had completely joined the human trafficking gang. From being forced to lead children to beg, she now directly disabled the children. But what I couldn't stop thinking about was another question: why didn't True show any signs of serious injury or broken bones when she was arrested? Why was she treated differently? The man opposite smiled faintly and asked back, "If it were you, would you rather be a cripple to become a tool for human traffickers, or stay alive to survive?" The question was so cruel that I was speechless. The man continued, "True chose the right answer, but the mistake was that she used the method of hurting others to survive. That is unacceptable." He looked at True's photo and shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Maybe she can't wait anymore." The words made me shiver. In the photo, True's hands were twisted to the point of being deformed, her face full of pain and despair. It's true that acts of violence can happen, but I don't think True would willingly turn into such a monster. If she died, I think it would be a very miserable death. The man lowered his head, his voice full of regret. "I don't know who killed Zhao, but it was definitely someone who had a very close relationship with her. Zhao lived in a dangerous environment, always on guard against everyone. Only someone very close to her could have done it." When the interrogation ended, he suddenly made a suggestion. "Do you remember the girl who was forced by True to beg? Besides a lie, that girl seemed very different. A lie was silly and crazy, not helpful at all. But the girl named Lu is different, we can ask her more." Although there was no clear evidence, this suggestion matched our initial guess. From the beginning, I thought that the killer of True was someone close. Because a lie's condition was not suitable for committing a crime, we were forced to adjust the direction of the investigation. Lee's name was immediately added to the list of suspects. We thought that finding this girl would be easy, but unexpectedly, we had to wander around the area for a long time without finding her. However, during the search, we discovered another worrying thing: the number of disabled beggars in the area was too large, far exceeding expectations. These people were of all ages, including children. Most of them had signs of physical deformity similar to a lie. This discovery made us shudder. The severity of the case was probably beyond what we had initially imagined. We increased the surveillance force in the area, even disguised ourselves to blend in. 2 days of surveillance yielded no clear results. The beggars were very vigilant, barely reacting when spoken to. They only repeated the act of kneeling and staring at the tourists' bags. Finally, by approaching some children, we got a clue: the beggars here are all managed by True, but Lu is even more cruel than True. She is not here often, but today I saw her walking towards that alley. Thanks to this help, we finally found Lu. The confrontation with Lu lasted for hours, but she did not answer a single word. Not even nodding or shaking her head. My colleague wondered, could she be deaf and mute? In a place where all the beggars were disabled, the fact that Lu could be a deaf and mute girl made the situation even more strange. We speculated that she might have been injured later, but if Lu was deaf and mute, why did the other beggars accuse her of bullying them? This conflict forced us to take Lu for a comprehensive examination. The results showed that her eardrums and vocal cords were completely normal, but she still refused to communicate. The forensic doctor observed Lee's attitude and made a diagnosis: it is possible that she has psychological mutism. This is a self-defense reaction that occurs after experiencing a major shock, causing the sufferer to refuse to communicate with the outside world. Such a condition is usually temporary. If Lou is really in this state, it means that she can speak, but does not want to. But what reason did True have to be the reason for her to close herself off? The relationship between them may have been very close. However, Lee's reaction was too intense. From observation, True seemed to have only lost his leadership position, and it was unlikely that he would do anything more serious to further hurt Lou. Looking at Lee's strange silence, I felt that something was very unusual. However, without any direct evidence related to the case, relying only on vague speculation, we could not keep her for too long. After several rounds of interrogation, we finally had to let Lou return with regret. Unexpectedly, this decision led to an extremely serious mistake. An important witness of the case was almost harmed. Chapter 4. The investigation at the police station was still at a standstill. The case was at a standstill. This situation lasted until the third day, when an unexpected turn of events occurred. That afternoon, after reporting the situation, I returned to the police station to continue monitoring. When I passed a small alley, I was about to light a cigarette when I suddenly heard a piercing scream from inside, followed by a series of chaotic sounds. It sounded like a girl's cry for help, so I immediately ran in the direction of the sound. As expected, in the hidden corner of the alley, I saw two young men blocking a girl against the wall. And surprisingly, the girl who was attacked was Lou, the person we had just met earlier. Lou was still wearing the tattered cotton shirt from last time, and the two young men were also dirty and skinny, clearly beggars. This surprised me. As she was about to intervene, one of the two young men shouted, "Tell me. What did Zhao do? Why did you hide everything?" That person was a blind man, his eyes squinted as if he couldn't see clearly. In contrast to her previous indifference, this time Lee was just stunned, then suddenly shook her head repeatedly. Her whole body trembled with fear, but her mouth was still tightly closed, refusing to speak. The blind man's friend stepped forward. This person was thin, but his biceps were very strong. He gritted his teeth and said, "Tell me the truth. If you were just an outsider, we would let you go." Hearing this, Lee shook her head even harder. The blind man laughed coldly, answering for her, "Stop pretending. You've been taken away by the police, you must have told everything." Hearing this, Lee was so scared that she screamed and started struggling violently. Seeing this, the two young men tried to restrain her. One of them was clearly disabled, limping. Although smaller than the other two, Lou was still very aggressive, kicking and punching wildly, making it difficult for them to control. Sensing something was wrong, I quickly rushed in. As I approached, I saw the blind young man pull out a dagger from his pocket and lunge straight at Lee's neck. In a split second, I kicked him in the back, causing the tip of the knife to graze the girl's skin. The limping man panicked and backed away in anxiety, but he was no match for me. After taking all three of them to the police station, we quickly proceeded to interrogate them. But the results disappointed us. The other two young men completely denied having talked in the alley, while Lou remained strangely silent. In the face of the indifferent attitude of the girl who was rescued, my suspicions grew. The people who were most afraid were the criminals. But Lou did not show any fear of the police. On the contrary, her attitude seemed to be trying to protect something. So this time, I changed tactics, bluntly asking, "You killed True, right?" Perhaps the question was too sudden, causing Lou to tremble unconsciously after hearing it. She suddenly raised her head to look at me. Although she did not answer, I still noticed her pupils constricted. This was a typical reaction when under great pressure. Obviously, she knew something about True. "True treated you very well, why did you want to harm her?" All the evidence showed that Lou was unlikely to be the murderer. But this did not mean that she had nothing to do with the case. We needed to put Lou under greater pressure to observe her reaction, even stimulate her to defend herself. Faced with the question, Lou showed more and more obvious fear, as if she was trying to avoid something. Lou was very scared, but did not shake her head to deny anything. This silence, as if admitting, made us extremely uneasy. Could it be that Lou really participated in the process of killing True? We continued to question, but in front of someone who seemed to have been muted, the constant questioning only made Lou retreat deeper into her shell. We decided to change tactics, using indirect methods to put pressure. I laid out a pile of documents on the table, applying interrogation techniques, pretending that the police had grasped most of the truth. Pulling out a photo of the crime scene, I deliberately tilted it at an angle where Lou could only see a faint part. We found the place where True was detained and where she had her leg broken. The location was very discreet, no one would hear her screams for help. The marks on her body were all kept as evidence. Whether you like it or not, all of this is enough to convict you. I only gave vague information, based on the facts that we were sure of. This was a gamble. If Lou was really involved in the case, with her current mental state, these words were enough to make her waver. However, Lee's reaction was not as expected. Her state remained unchanged, her body tense, but showing no signs of panic. Looking at Lee's frozen expression, I began to suspect that I had gone in the wrong direction. At that moment, a sentence from the blind young man in the alley suddenly flashed through my mind. What did True do that she was so protective of her? Protection. I suddenly realized something, immediately took out the full-body photo of True on the operating table and placed it in front of Lou. If it weren't for True, you would have become a corpse like this. No matter what role you played in this, you must take responsibility. We always thought that True, a cruel human trafficker, was simply a victim of revenge. But what if the story was completely the opposite? As soon as I finished speaking, Lee's expression finally changed. She looked at me in panic, shaking her head like a spinning top. I thought she was going to scream, but after a few seconds, tears started rolling down her cheeks. With a broken and painful voice, Lou said, "No. It wasn't me. I didn't hurt her. If it wasn't for me, she wouldn't have died." I couldn't believe my ears when I heard those words. But the story Lou told next made us all fall into an ice hole. Lou said that she didn't kill True, and she didn't know the whole process of her death, but she knew who the killer was. Although they had the same last name, Lou and True were not related by blood. Perhaps because of their similar last name and circumstances, True treated Lou very well, like an older sister. True never hurt Lou. Even when she couldn't get money, True just ignored her, not treating her cruelly like other children. Because of this favor, Lou was often bullied by other beggars. However, Lou always used True as a shield, relying on that to oppress others. Gradually, all the beggars around the landscape hated Lou to the core. In one revenge, the real culprit targeted Lou, but accidentally, True discovered and came forward to deal with it. Lou said that she thought everything would be like the previous times, True would stand up to protect her, and then everything would go back to normal. But this time, True never came back. Lou saw True's body floating in the landscape area, but she did not dare to report it to the police for fear of being implicated. If I hadn't gone out because I was so hungry, I would never have seen you guys again. Faced with our repeated questions, Lou only answered timidly and selfishly, "I'm afraid you'll put me in jail." From a legal perspective, Lou did not help the perpetrator hide or destroy evidence. She only knew about it but did not report it, so she did not violate the law. But from a moral perspective, Lee's behavior really made us feel cold. As police officers, we have encountered countless evil people. But I always tell myself that people have two sides, good and evil, and no one is completely evil. But every time I face people like Lou, I can't help but think that perhaps our understanding of humanity is too idealistic. By the end of the interrogation, Lou was still crying and pitying herself. She said she regretted getting Zhao involved, but even in her apology, she was still only thinking about herself. If she had treated me like other children, this wouldn't have happened. We could all live better lives, right? Too selfish. In her eyes, there was only herself. Zhao might be blameworthy, but he didn't deserve to die like this. Thanks to Lee's testimony, we quickly identified the real culprit of the case. Surprisingly, the two young men I caught in the alley that day were the culprits. The case had enough evidence to prosecute, but to completely close it, we needed more evidence to form a tight logical loop. The two main suspects, Hal and Doc, had very different attitudes when being interrogated. Hal was very cooperative, but Doc was not like that. He relied on Lee's testimony to protect himself, deliberately playing a game of stalling for time with us. However, Doc did not have the same tenacity as Hal. After 2 days of continuous interrogation, he finally could not stand the pressure and confessed the entire crime process. Chapter 5: Hal's Testimony. Hal, the man with a crippled leg, said that when he was young, he had been in a circus, had some strength and knew a little martial arts. But after being sold here by True, he had his leg broken and became taciturn and quiet from then on. Hal didn't say much, but chose to lead us to the scene where True was tortured. It was a garbage transfer station, located at the intersection of several residential areas, at the end of a dead-end alley. The distance from there to the scenic area where True's body was found was just over 800 meters. Hal said that this garbage transfer station was registered under True's name, but to avoid being discovered, she registered it under someone else's name, through many intermediary levels. This is the reason why we have never found this property. The area of the garbage station has a strong stench. We followed the statement, passed through the piles of garbage and found the secret room. As expected, the room had been specially treated, with soundproofing covering the walls. In addition, the garbage station was not near residential areas, so even if there were screams at night, it would be difficult to hear. There were no bodies inside, just dirty blankets, a chamber pot in the corner, and an area with torture tools. One side of the wall was attached with straps, to fix the person to the flat surface. Opposite it was a series of tools such as hammers, pliers, and other crude torture tools. Hal pointed to this area and began to detail how he participated in torturing True. Hal went into great detail, from the injuries True suffered, the way she struggled, and even her painful cries. The autopsy reports showed many bruises and scratches on True's back and legs. One of them had a very strange angle. Forensic Dr. Tran determined that this was not caused by a normal impact, and this detail completely matched Hal's testimony. This proved that Hal had indeed participated in the torture, but when we asked about True's death, his expression suddenly became blank. "I didn't kill True. Even though I always wanted to." Hal's answer seemed contradictory, but he later explained. Hal said that the incident started with Lee's provocations. The two wanted to find Lou to confront her a bit, but True appeared. Both of them were very afraid of True because of the previous beatings, so they didn't dare to do anything big. However, during the push and shove, Doc accidentally knocked True unconscious and took her to the garbage station. Hal didn't expect Doc to be so cruel. Later, Doc said that he was blinded by True, so his hatred for her was greater than anyone else. "Unlike the beggars who only lost their legs, I lost my sight. Therefore, my hatred was much deeper than theirs." Doc's hatred infected Hal, causing him to become even more violent. Hearing True's miserable screams, I remembered everything I had ever suffered, and my leg that would never heal. Hal's rational nerve was broken. He admitted to participating in breaking True's arm, so that she could experience the feeling of having her leg broken like me. In addition to Hal's testimony, the crime scene investigation team also collected many blood samples and traces at the garbage station. The test results showed that many blood samples matched the DNA of Hal, Doc, and True. Doc still tried to deny responsibility, but forensic Dr. Tran compared the marks on True's shoulder with Doc's handprint, and they were completely identical. In addition, Doc's clothes had traces of wear and tear, which were determined to be from the fight with True. Although the perpetrator tried to erase all traces at the scene, the remaining fabric fibers under True's fingernails proved Doc's involvement. Faced with undeniable evidence, Doc was forced to admit his crime. During the final interrogation, when asked about the motive for killing True, Doc suddenly said something very strange. "I admit that I killed True, but if you think the reason is because of my eyes, then you guessed wrong." Although the evidence was sufficient to convict Doc, his pensive expression made us suddenly have a very strange premonition. No matter how hard we tried to question him, Doc did not answer any more, only looked at us with contempt, as if accusing him of murder was so naive that it was ridiculous. Doc's strange reaction made us wary, but Hao did not care about that. Therefore, we once again turned to interrogate Liu. Unexpectedly, after hearing the end of the question, Li's expression suddenly became uncertain. After a moment of silence, she reluctantly said, "Doc is a madman, mentally ill. Sister, he is truly a monster." The surprise made my eyes widen. A terrifying conjecture suddenly formed. Under our pressure, Li seemed to hesitate, but in the end she continued, "He is a blind man with a mental illness. The strange thing is, the more he is tortured, the more grateful he feels. He is like us, also a kidnapped child, but he works as a henchman for human traffickers, and feels proud of it." In Zhao's murder case, we initially suspected the perpetrator's abnormal mental state. Through the extreme method of committing the crime, we deduced that the perpetrator might be mentally unstable. This was also the reason Li was initially put on the suspect list. However, when Hao and Doc were arrested one after another, we seemed to have overlooked this aspect. Although Hao was agitated by revenge, he was still rational. His personality was reserved and quiet, but there was no sign of madness. The one who was truly abnormal, from beginning to end, was Document. But apart from a few rebuttals, Doc never tried to justify his actions. He did not regret killing True, nor did he show any fear of the upcoming verdict. This was completely not a normal human state of mind. I asked Liu, "Isn't Doc really just an ordinary beggar? What kind of relationship do he and True have with the human traffickers?" Liu lowered her head, tiredly nodding in acknowledgement. She said that, in fact, Doc was placed by the human traffickers to monitor True. The two of them had a relationship of both monitoring each other and playing a controlling role in the organization. But unlike True, who still had some conscience, Doc was truly driven to the brink of insanity. It seemed that he had Stockholm Syndrome. Instead of hating the human traffickers who kidnapped him, he felt dependent and loyal to them. To prove his loyalty, Doc even blinded himself. It was this crazy act that earned him the organization's trust, and he quickly stood on equal footing with True. Liu said, "He was very crazy, because Ms. True definitely still had some conscience, so the two of them argued a lot." This time, she didn't realize that the blind man had nothing to fear anymore. After the boss was arrested, he definitely didn't hesitate to attack her. The murder case in the park had come to an end. The evidence was complete. The prosecutor quickly prosecuted 2 suspects. At the trial, Doc was charged with aggravated murder, cruel methods, and was eventually sentenced to death. Not long after, Hao provided a list of members of the human trafficking organization. Based on this list, the police dismantled a large-scale child trafficking ring. The murder case in the park was closed, but its echoes still haunted me. When reviewing the case report, there was one detail that kept me thinking, especially when facing Tu Fai's parents. They still could not believe that their daughter was involved in the crime of child trafficking and causing serious injuries. However, during the inspection at the garbage treatment station, in addition to the traces related to the case, we also discovered many strange DNA samples. One of these samples matched the data of the missing children search system. It was a report about a boy who had gone missing many years ago, named Tu Long. When the boy's photo appeared on the screen, I immediately recognized a familiar face. This boy was the beggar who often stayed next to Liu at the park. The boy also had a disability in his hand, but not as severe as Li. His hand was deformed at the elbow, but his fingers could still move flexibly. According to the boy, True broke his arm himself. To correct the misaligned bone, True also used a rope to fix the elbow. Only when the hand was completely deformed did she allow him to leave the place of torture. Based on this testimony, we quickly found several other disabled children. All of them denounced Zhao's cruel acts. Although Zhao was dead, the crimes she had committed against the kidnapped children were undeniable. We could not be sure whether she had been forced to join the human trafficking organization, but it was clear that she had fallen into it and become a part of it. As a police officer, I should not have let my personal feelings interfere with the case, but every time the murder in the park was mentioned, my heart ached. After the case was over, I quickly left the media spotlight. Not wanting to face the critical questions I had anticipated, I went to the slum where Zhao had lived. Alai's father, Zhao Guangjuan, was sentenced to 2 years in prison for child abandonment. No one in the family would take care of Alai, so she was temporarily sent to a welfare center. I came to complete the handover procedures, but as soon as I entered the area, I saw a familiar face, Li. She was standing next to Alai, helping him pack his things. Seeing me, Li panicked, her face flushed. After a moment of silence, she stammered, I just came to help Alai pack his things. I raised my eyebrows at her, my eyes sweeping over Alai's weak arms. Li hurriedly explained, I'm not lying. Sister Zhao once said that Alai was beaten to the point of disability. I didn't think it would be this serious. Sister Zhao is very regretful. Alai is the thing she feels most guilty about in her life. That's why she kept Alai by her side, treating him like a real brother. Li's words sounded very sincere. At this point, she no longer had any reason to lie. A ray of humanity. When I looked at Lu, I couldn't help but think of Tu Fai, the girl who had argued fiercely with her parents to protect her ideals. Perhaps, the reason True never harmed Lu was because she saw herself in Lu. Lu, like True before, had fallen from a proud young lady to the abyss. The only difference was that True had encountered a crazy human trafficking organization, while Lu still had a chance to turn back. True's story ended, but the lesson she left behind will last forever.